Hey, this is Tucker with your second Ecology Vocabulary list. So you want to take note of the word, part of speech, definition, and any example that I say or that you think of that will help you to remember these words. And if at any point I'm going too fast in the recording, feel free to pause it. So the first word is decomposers, and decomposers is a noun. I underlined the word decompose, which some of you may already know, but a decomposer is an organism, such as bacteria or fungus, that breaks down dead matter and returns nutrients to the soil. So any organism that breaks down dead matter so that that energy, those nutrients can be returned into the soil, into the ecosystem. So think of decomposers as organisms that decompose or break down or separate things into their elements or parts. Again, you can see this kind of dead tree. It's been cut, and on the side is obviously this fungus that's growing around it and is slowly going to eat away at this tree stump and decompose it so that the nutrients can be returned into what looks like a forest. The second word is estuary. It's a noun, and it is a body of water where the fresh water and the saltwater ecosystems come together or they merge. And so when you think of an estuary, you might want to think of like an arm or an inlet of the sea at the lower end of a river. So kind of where the river merges with the ocean, connects with the ocean, where those 2 points of fresh water and seawater meet, that is an estuary. And often estuaries are protected spaces because they're really important ecosystems. There are specific birds and animals and organisms that just live in the estuary, that really rely on the estuary and need it to stay protected. The third word is habitat. This is a noun, and it is the place or surroundings where an organism normally lives. And some organisms have a very specific habitat. They can only live in a very specific kind of place with specific surroundings. And then you have some organisms that are actually much more adaptable, and so they can live in a couple different types of habitats. So, for example, you have the red fox. The red fox can actually live in kind of a range of habitats, from forests to grasslands to deserts, and they do a really good job of adapting. They're very resourceful, and so some, like I said, some organisms rely on a very specific habitat. They can only survive in that specific habitat, while other organisms are a little bit more flexible and can survive in a variety of habitats. Herbivores. Now, I've underlined the word herb because most of us have heard of herbs, right? Whether we use them in cooking or we grow them out in a garden, talking about like a flowering plant of some kind. And then I underlined the word vor because that comes from the root word, which means one that eats. So one that eats herbs or flowering plants is an herbivore. So it's an organism that eats only plants. So you have lots of animals out in nature that just eat plant matter. They do not consume any meat in their diet. And a good example would be a deer, right? They graze on, leaves and plants, but they only eat plant matter. They don't eat other animals. Host. Host is a noun, and a host is a living organism on which a parasite lives. And so, if you think about hosting a dinner, right? Having people over to your house to eat dinner, you provide them with nourishment. You can kind of take that same idea and apply it to a host in an environment. So if a host has a parasite, it is providing that parasite that's living on it with nutrients that the parasite needs to survive. So, for example, we have mice. Mice are often hosts of things like ticks. So I was just listening to this NPR story about how a single mouse can have upwards of 50 ticks on its body. So because the tick attaches itself to the mouse, it then feeds, sucks the blood of the mouse, taking nourishment from the mouse, which is its host, which is why mice are so gross. Limiting factor is a noun, and I underlined the word limit because obviously it's going to hold something back, right? So a limiting factor in the environment is something that keeps the population of an organism from increasing as much as it might otherwise be able to if that limiting factor wasn't there, right? And limiting factors could be anything from the food supply or water supply. So maybe there just isn't enough food for the population to rapidly expand as much as it might otherwise be able to. Competition for resources is definitely a limiting factor. Disease, maybe abnormal weather, human activities, those can all be limiting factors that limit the kind of explosion of a population of a particular organism. So they really cannot reproduce as much as they could without that limiting factor. So when we think about human impact, the more we intrude and build in areas that used to be home to specific organisms, we limit those organisms' ability to reproduce. Our human activity becomes the limiting factor. Niche is a noun, and it is a habitat that supplies everything needed for a specific species or an organism to survive. So in that particular niche, the organism, whatever that organism may be, gets everything that it needs. It's like a perfect fit for the needs of the organism. And so when you look at a picture of these birds in the water, obviously these birds are getting their food source from the water, whether it's insects or plants or whatever they eat, and then the water itself. So you have everything that they need in this niche, in this specific environment. Omnivores, and again, I underlined the word omni, meaning all, and then vores, as we said earlier, means one that eats. So omnivores is one that eats all, right? A consumer that eats both plants and animals. So really everything is included in an omnivore's diet. So when we think about really well-known omnivores, we might think of something like a bear, right? Bears eat berries and probably some leaves. I'm not an expert on the bear diet, but I do know they eat some vegetation. And then they also can eat meat in their diet as well. So they have that blend where they will eat just about anything, right? So they can eat plant matter, they can eat meat. Parasite. Now, parasite is a noun. Remember, we talked about this with the host. The host has a parasite. The parasite lives off the host. So a parasite is an organism that lives in, so some people have like worms inside their body that actually feed on the nutrients in their body. So a parasite can live inside your body, or it can live outside the body, kind of attached to a host. And so a tick living on or feeding on a mouse would be, the tick is the parasite, the mouse is the host. But even when we look in the plant world, you're also going to see parasites. So if you ever look up in the trees in Sonoma County where we live and you see these big bunches of green in the tree, that's mistletoe. And mistletoe is a parasite that attaches to and then penetrates the branches of a tree or a shrub, and they absorb the mistletoe absorbs the water, absorbs the nutrients from its host plant. So ironically, we think about mistletoe and the holidays and kissing under the mistletoe, but mistletoe is actually this very parasitic, plant that attaches itself to other living plants to get its nutrients and water.